On the 14th of March 2019, Judge Nambula Dlamini walked into Courtroom 4 of the Federal High Court, not to deliver a judgment, but to receive one. She wore a dark gray dress. No jewelry, no robe, nothing that suggested power or authority. She had spent 22 years in this building telling other people their fate. Today, someone else held the gavel. The charges read out against her took 11 minutes. 11 minutes to describe 19 years of decisions. 19 years of verdicts that were not verdicts, they were transactions. Bought, paid for, delivered on time, like groceries, like favors between powerful people who understood how the system worked behind closed doors. 2,147 people went to prison because of her rulings. Most of them were poor. Most of them had no connection. Most of them had no idea why the judge looked at them the way she did, with such complete, unbothered certainty, before saying the word that ended their lives. Guilty. We begin this story where all courtroom stories should begin, at the end. And then we go backwards, all the way to the beginning, to find the exact moment when a good woman decided to become something else entirely. The courtroom was packed long before 8 a.m. It had been full every day of the trial for 6 weeks. Journalists from major television stations and newspapers filled the front rows. Law students from the state and private universities stood at the back, whispering in low voices, phones clutched tightly like they were afraid to miss history. And in the public gallery, scattered and silent, sat people who had lost years of their lives. Not suspects, not criminals, but victims. Former defendants, men and women who had served years of wrongful imprisonment, sitting in the public gallery with faces that held something between fury and exhaustion. The presiding judge that day was Justice Saifo Koza, a quiet, sharp-eyed man from Kano with a reputation for being utterly unimpressed by power. Not politicians, not businessmen, and certainly not disgraced judges. He had seen powerful people in courtrooms before. He knew exactly how they sat, how they breathed, how they arranged their faces to look wronged. He had learned to look past the face. He looked at Nambula Dlamini and saw a woman who had stopped pretending 3 weeks ago. The performance had run out. What sat before him now was something rawer, a person who had lived inside a lie for so long that the lie and the person had become the same thing. And now the lie had been separated from her, surgically, by 6 weeks of testimony. And she did not look whole without it. Court record, March 14, 2019. Justice Koza read aloud.
The accused, Judge Nambula Dlamini, having been found guilty on 43 counts of judicial corruption, perversion of the course of justice, and racketeering, is hereby sentenced to 25 years imprisonment without the option of a parole hearing for the first 15 years. The court further orders a full review of all criminal convictions handed down in cases connected to the accused, a process estimated to affect 2,147 individual cases.
She did not cry. She did not speak. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at a point just above Justice Koza's left shoulder. The way people in the gallery would later say, she had always stared when delivering verdicts. Like she was reading something invisible that only she could see. In the public gallery, a man named Sunday Okek, who had spent 7 years in the state's maximum security prison for a robbery he did not commit, watched her be led away. He had no expression on his face. He had spent 7 years practicing having no expression, because in prison, expressions cost you things you could not afford to lose. He watched the guards walk her through the door that he had once been walked through. And he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Now you know what the room smells like." Nambula Dlamini was born in 1961, the same period the country was stumbling through its early post-independence instability, just years before the Civil War would fracture the nation. She grew up in a cramped 2-room face-me-I-face-you apartment with her mother, grandmother, 2 uncles, and 5 cousins. Her father had been detained during a military crackdown when she was 3. When he returned years later, he was quieter, distant, like a man who had left something important behind and never found it again. What Nambula Dlamini had, in the place of a stable childhood, was her grandmother, a tall, severe woman named Manzama who had survived things she refused to name and had converted that survival into an absolute, uncompromising belief in two things: education and the law. The law, Manzama used to say, her voice low and deliberate, is the only thing standing between the poor and those who think they are untouchable. If you understand it, nobody can finish you completely. Namvula didn't just hear it, she understood it. She became it. She more than understood, she absorbed it as identity. She was the child in the neighborhood who read old newspaper used to wrap Accra from the front page to the back, including the legal notices that nobody else read. She was the teenager who walked 5 kilometers to the library every Saturday to read case files from public court records. Not as homework, as hunger. I want you to hold this image of her, a girl from Lagos who believed in the law the way some children believe in God. I want you to hold it as we go forward, because it makes what she became much harder to dismiss. She was not always corrupt. She was not born greedy. That makes the story more honest and more painful. Namvula studied law at the State University, one of the few women in her class who didn't come from wealth or political connections. She was not the most celebrated student. She was not a debating champion or a student union president. She was simply the person who worked hardest and left last and knew, every single day, exactly why she was there. She graduated in 1986 and joined a small law firm that handled human rights cases, defending activists during the military era, challenging unlawful detentions, filing emergency motions to stop evictions. It was a dangerous work. The office was broken into twice. One of her colleagues was beaten by unknown men. She received a letter one day: "Stop what you're doing, or your family will pay for it." She didn't stop. She was admitted to the bar in 1988. She appeared in court for the first time as an advocate on the 15th of February 1988, a Tuesday morning, Courtroom 7, defending a 17-year-old boy accused of participating in a violent protest. She won, on a technicality. Walking out of the courtroom that day, she would later say, "That was the cleanest I had ever felt in my life." In 1999, shortly after countries returned to democracy, she was appointed as a high court judge. She was 38. She represented everything the new judiciary wanted to project: integrity, resilience, and a break from the corruption of the past. At her swearing-in, people who had known her from her early days stood and applauded. Her grandmother didn't clap. She just nodded once. That nod meant, "You have started. Now do not disgrace what built you." Her grandmother died 2 years later. She never saw what her granddaughter became. Some people say that is a mercy. Namvula, lying in her cell in the Women's Correctional Center, 20 years later, was not sure it was. His name was Rian Venter. He came into Namvula Dlamini's life in 2001, the same year her marriage collapsed. Her eldest son was diagnosed of a heart disease, and financial pressure began tightening around her like a slow rope. Venter didn't look dangerous. He was calm, soft-spoken, respectable, a businessman, real estate investor, church donor. But beneath that was a network stretching across land fraud, case manipulation, police connections, and money. Quiet, heavy, dangerous money. Rian Venter was not a dramatic villain. He did not arrive in a black car or make threats. He was a thin, mild-mannered man in his mid-40s who ran what appeared to be a legitimate property investment firm. He wore glasses. He drank rooibos tea. He had a soft, almost apologetic way of speaking, the voice of someone who wants very much to seem harmless, which is often the most dangerous kind of person in a room. He had connections to organized crime networks that stretched from state flats gangs to property fraud syndicates. But he had been watching Namvula Dlamini's courtroom for 8 months before he approached her. He knew her caseload. He knew her schedule. He knew her financial situation, the divorce settlement that had gone badly, the medical bills for her son, the private school fees for her youngest son that she was 3 months behind on. He knew the exact weight of her life, and he approached her with a solution shaped precisely to fit it. On 19th December 2000, a Tuesday evening, Namvula has agreed to meet an investor interested in community legal projects at a restaurant. She does not know yet who she is meeting. She orders water. He orders tea. He compliments her record. He mentions specific cases she is proud of. Then he slides an envelope across the table. Inside, 250,000 naira in cash, and a single typed note listing a case number and a requested verdict. She pushes it back. She stands up. She leaves. It is important to note that she left, and for 3 months after she left that dinner, she told nobody about the meeting, which was a mistake. But she left. She went home and lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what she would have done with 250,000 naira. Paid off the school fees. Fixed the roof. Bought her son a proper care facility instead of the city clinic that always smelled like floor polish and defeat. She thought about it every night for 3 months. And she did nothing. Venter let 3 months pass. Then he sent a second approach, not in person this time. A woman appeared at Nambula Dlamini's church on a Sunday morning, sat next to her during the service, and slipped a folded note into her hymn book during the singing. The note had a phone number and 4 words. The offer is 500,000 naira. He had doubled it. And he had come to her church. That was the message inside the message. I know where you worship. I know where you feel safe. And I can reach you anywhere. Nambula called the number that same evening. Not to accept. She told herself it was to refuse more firmly. To make clear that the approach was unwelcome and would be reported. Venter answered on the second ring. He was polite. He was understanding. He said he respected her position completely. And then, quietly, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that he had come across some documents. Documents relating to a case she had presided over in 1999. A case in which, he said, certain procedural irregularities had occurred. Nothing criminal, of course. But the kind of thing that, if surfaced at the wrong moment, could prompt an uncomfortable inquiry into her fitness for the bench. There were no documents. The irregularities did not exist. It was a complete fabrication. But Nambula did not know that. She had presided over hundreds of cases. She was not perfect. She had made genuine procedural errors before, small ones, the kind all judges make, and in the silence of that phone call, with a man who clearly knew things and could reach things, those small honest errors grew enormous in her imagination. She called him back 2 days later and said yes. The first verdict she sold cost 500,000 naira. A man named Wellington Makina, a small-time fraudster who was genuinely guilty, walked free. Nobody was harmed by that first transaction. Not in any way that was immediately visible. And that invisibility was the most dangerous thing about it. Because it taught Nambula something she would spend 19 years expanding on. It taught her that corruption, at the beginning, looks almost exactly like nothing.